Well, it's incredible stuff now. Okay.
Well, thank you all for joining us. This is Alison Weir, President of the Council for the National Interest. With us today on this conference call, truly a historic call, are James Ennes. He is the author of Assault on the Liberty, a Liberty survivor, and a wonderful speaker and researcher about what happened to the Liberty. Also joining us today to speak is Meadors, another Liberty survivor, the president of the Liberty Veterans Association. With us also is Dave Lewis, a third Liberty survivor who was in charge of the research department, is what they called it, I believe, euphemistically. And we also had Larry Toenjes here from the Eastern Mediterranean, Port Said, who has just sailed over 8,000 miles to have a commemorative ceremony for the 34 Americans who were killed on board the USS Liberty. We'll only have 30 minutes to discuss so many things, so I'll get right to the first person I thought we'd hear from, would be Larry Toenjes. And Larry, I was hoping you could tell us briefly when and how you discovered about the USS Liberty, and how you got the idea to have your voyage, what prompted that, and a little bit about it.
Okay, I'll try quickly. Probably my first awareness of the Liberty incident came from Paul Finley's book. And of course, so he included a chapter on the Liberty incident, but of course he included many chapters on the impact of the lobby upon the U.S. government and upon Congress. And this stuff just sort of germinated with me. I got pretty heavily into trying to understand why we went into the Iraq War, and in doing so, I became aware of many of the Yukon names. Many of them were strong advocates of Israel. And so gradually I just got this increasing awareness of the lobby. Then in the 2006 elections, which the Democrats won, as you know, and the Iraq War, and even the possibility of an Iran war were topics of that election. And since the Democrats won, I expected them to change things. Indeed, in March of 2007, it was announced that there was language in the appropriation bill that would require President Bush to seek congressional approval before undertaking any military action against Iran. About 3 days later, Speaker Pelosi announced that language had been pulled, basically at the behest of the Israeli lobby. And two or three other incidents drove home to me the fact that basically the lobby had reversed our own congressional election. And it sort of occurred to me there that the reason the Liberty incident had never been investigated was also because of the Israeli lobby and enforcing the cover-up on that. And so, I'm not sure when the idea dawned on me, but I thought to myself, well, we can't even discuss the Liberty incident. We can't discuss anything with respect to U.S.-Israeli relationships and U.S. Middle East policy. And so it just occurred to me that one way to focus attention on both on the victims of the Liberty incident as well as on the cover-up and the role of the lobby in that was just to go to the very place where it happened and go there and say, no. And that's really the genesis of this whole thing.
That's very interesting.
That's
That's so interesting to hear. Just briefly, you've just undertaken an 8,000-mile long voyage to honor Americans who died serving their country. Normally that would be considered enormously newsworthy, a wonderful human interest feature. Has CNN contacted you or Fox News?
I haven't seen any emails to that regard yet, or any phone messages, no.
That's interesting. That's interesting. Happily,
yeah.
I know that the Galveston News has had an excellent column by you, and I think of a few local newspapers maybe covering this, so at least a few people have paid paid attention, but the national media, one would have expected on any other topic to at least have some stories about this, seems to completely have ignored it.
That seems to be the case. And Gene couldn't even make any headway with the Houston Chronicle, for example.
That's amazing. And I know you're from Houston. The man on board your ship with you right now, I think Rusty Glenn, a Marine veteran, is also from Texas, as I recall.
That's correct. Corsicana, up by Dallas.
I see.
Yes. I think his hometown newspaper is going to run a story about him.
Oh, good. Sometimes it's the hometown newspapers that might break the cover up a little bit. Well, next up, I'd like to ask James Ennes, who wrote the book that really broke this wide open. Without James Ennes putting all of this together about what Israel had done to U.S. Navy ships, I don't think any of us would know about it. He's the one who researched it and put it all together. Jim, thanks so much for being with us today.
It's my pleasure. Thank you, Alison. I started actually taking notes for the book while I was still in the hospital. I brought a typewriter, and I was in the hospital for 4 months. And I brought a hospital in, set it up on my bed, and started writing extensive notes for the book. And one of the things that I learned while I was doing that Larry touched upon, is the lack of newspaper coverage. And that is, I found very early in my research, I contacted a few members of Congress, only 2 or 3 of which were willing to mention the Liberty publicly. And they told me that on the morning after the attack, here is the Liberty attack on June 8th, and before the morning of June 9th, every congressman was contacted by Israeli lobbyists telling him that this is an anti-Semitic story. If you report it, it will be untrue and it will be damaging to American Jews, and therefore you must play it down and not make a major story out of it. And most congressmen and most newspapers handled it exactly that way. They showed up, the story showed up briefly on the front page, and then vanished. And if you heard from it again, it was a week or 2 weeks later when they said, well, it's been investigated and is found to be a tragic mistake. Even many of the initial headlines like the Washington Post reported on the front page, not ship was attacked, but ship was accidentally attacked by Israel. And so that was the slant promoted by literally hundreds of lobbyists from day one.
That's interesting. That right from day one, the same talking points we see today, which is that it was, quote, an accident, and that even talking about an attack on American servicemen is somehow anti-Semitic.
Exactly. Robert Kennedy and another congressman met on the floor, or on the steps on the front of the Congress with a couple of newspapers around to discuss the tragic accident that had been the USS Liberty and how it should not be given any more attention than possible.
Wow. It's just
and that's continued, obviously, to this day. If you write to Congress today, people write to me constantly and say, gee, I just read your book, and what can I do? Can I write to Congress? And if they write to their congressman, they get back a pro forma letter saying, this was investigated and found to be a tragic mistake. And the truth is, we have a letter from Congress saying that, from the Library of Congress, saying that it has never been investigated by Congress. And still, there's another author who wrote a book claiming 13 or 15 investigations, and none of them ever occurred. If someone asks a congressman in committee, what about the U.S. Liberty? And he says, we haven't seen anything. about it. This goes in the author's book as evidence that it was investigated by Congress, and he just writes it off as something that was a tragic accident.
Wow. Jim, can you tell us about your own experience on board the ship that day, where you were when you first saw this aircraft, and what happened then?
I was off to the deck on the bridge from 8 to 12, and then I was back again as a conning officer in general quarters from 1 to 2 when the attack started, and was on the bridge most of the hour, the intervening hour. And during that period, I saw the ship circled 13 times by Israeli aircraft. Usually within a couple hundred feet of the ship. I mean, we had airplanes flying directly over that were clearly marked, most of them clearly marked Israeli airplanes. We knew who we were being circled by, and meanwhile, our intercept operators heard them radioing their headquarters telling them that we were an American ship. So we literally had no fears of that because here we were being looked at closely, and they were telling their headquarters we were American. So when we had a general quarters drill from 1 to 2, and it ended at 2, 3 more airplanes came out toward us from Tel Aviv, and we picked them up on radar miles away, and then we saw them approaching, and we really were not terribly concerned because these were similar to the airplanes that had been circling us all day. So these passed down the starboard side, the right side of the ship, turned left again, and headed straight down the center line. I went up to the signal bridge I had just been relieved from the con, and I went up to the signal bridge with a photographer to take some pictures of these airplanes. When we saw orange flames under each each wing as they were firing 50-millimeter cannon and rockets that literally mowed down everybody on deck and broke one of the pieces hit my left leg, broke it above the knee, but threw me against the railing where I was standing. But there must have been 15 or 20 men around me, and all dropped. And here I was with a broken leg standing on my good leg. I hopped down into the pilot house, and the attack continued from the air for another 20 or 25 minutes. Then there was a lapse as the torpedo boats that were spotted at the same time as the airplanes. The torpedo boats approached, firing as they came, fired 5, we learned, torpedoes. Fortunately, were very poor shots, missed with 4 of them. Hit one hit amidships, blew a 40-foot hole inside the ship and killed 25 more men in addition to the 9 that had been killed by gunfire. Now, almost immediately, within a couple of hours, we were able to contact Washington, and we told them what was going on. Airplanes were sent during the attack to our aid, and the White House ordered them recalled while we were still under attack. And almost immediately after the attack, the ship received orders to talk to no one. This story is not to be talked about. And we got daily orders from Washington that nobody could talk about this, nobody could write to their family about it. When we finally left the ship, we were told not to discuss it with our wives or parents or anyone at risk of going to prison. So most of us followed that and stayed pretty quiet.
Let me just ask Dave Lewis to come in here now, especially about those rescue flights being recalled. Dave, I think you're one of the people who especially knows that story. If you could tell us about that, please do.
I was in sick bay on the USS America. My eyes had been seared shut with a blast, and when the doctor lanced them open, he also told me that the Admiral wanted to see me in his stateroom as soon as possible. So I hobbled on up there, and Admiral Geist called me in. He swore me to secrecy. He said that he wanted somebody to know that during his lifetime, I was not privileged to tell anyone. And he said he launched aircraft and notified Washington, and Robert McNamara came on the phone and ordered them recalled. He said that he assumed somebody thought that he was dumb enough to have launched nuclear weapons because they were having a nuclear weapons drill at the time. So he recalled his aircraft, and he set up another flight of aircraft incapable of carrying nukes, and he launched again because he knew we were still under attack. And he again notified Washington. And Robert McNamara again came on the line and ordered them recalled. He challenged the order. He said our Americans were being attacked. It was a U.S. ship. And he thought that the flight should go through. And Lyndon Johnson came on the line and said he didn't give a damn if the ship sunk and all the Americans were killed. He would not embarrass his ally. So they knew all along who was doing the attacking.
And that's very interesting. And it's interesting that Johnson specifically said he did not want to embarrass what he called our ally.
Yeah, right.
Also, it's interesting. I know some people have claimed that the flights were carrying nuclear weapons, but it sounds to me like that is incorrect.
I've heard that also. I don't know. That's what Geist told me.
Yeah, so Geist told you...
He didn't say they weren't carrying nuclear weapons. He said he thought some idiot back in Washington thought he might launch nuclear weapons.
That's right. And then he said that the second aircraft that he launched were incapable of carrying nuclear weapons. Is that correct?
Yes, yes.
Uh-huh.
That's why he launched another one, just in case that's what Washington was afraid of.
I see. And when they had that 1 week-long inquiry that people try to claim was an investigation into the attack, did you testify about this, or were you allowed to testify concerning this?
I was not asked at that time, nor ever any time ever since. I have never been allowed to testify, no.
Nor was
well, I hope we'll give you an opportunity. We have some plans at CNI to do something about this in Washington, D.C., so I hope you'll finally have the chance to do that. Next, before we run out of time, I want to make sure to get to Joe Meadors, who's the current president of the Liberty Veterans Association. Joe, could you tell us about where you were and your experience on board the ship?
Well, I was one of the two signalmen on board, so I was involved in visual communications between ships. So I was up on in the time of the attack started, I was up on the signal bridge, and with Jim and a bunch of other guys, and I distinctly remember the thing that stands out most in my mind during the entire attack was the aircraft bearing down straight on us, and then watching their noses light up as they began the attack. And after it started, like Jim said, we all ran down to the pilot house, and he clambered down, and I was fortunate enough not to be too wounded, so I could go down on my own. And somebody sounded the general quarters, and then the crew all went to the general quarters station, and since I was signalman, I couldn't get back up on the signal bridge, but what I did was I kept a watch on the flag to make sure it was still flying, and one time I noticed that the flag had been shot down, so Frank Brown was one of the quartermasters that got killed. He and I got the holiday colors and hauled them up on one of our halyards. And from then, I was just the messenger of the watch. I was taking messages from the captain back to the radio shack that was in the back part of the ship.
So you were one of the ones that raised the second flag, what you call the holiday colors. Is that an especially large flag?
That was the largest flag we had. That was about 9 by 13 feet, I believe the dimensions are.
And how scary was it to do that? Were you still under fire at that time?
Yeah, we were, but it was just one of those things where you do things without thinking. Probably if I had a chance to think about it, I don't know if I'd do it or not, but since that was my job and we were so well drilled, we just did our job without thinking.
And were you, what kind of, did you yourself have some sort of injury?
I just had some shrapnel, that's all. It's not, wasn't really too bad.
And, were you mostly during the attack up on top of the deck or down inside somewhere?
No, I was down in the pilot house, just one deck below the signal bridge.
Uh-huh.
And one thing I'd like to note about Larry's effort is that I emailed every member of Congress and told them about Larry's effort and asked them for a statement to be read by Larry at the memorial service. And not a single member of Congress, not even my own, has provided me with any kind of statement whatsoever. Of course, if it's an issue, I'll pursue myself. But I think that's significant that we have a ship that the captain won the Medal of Honor. That it was one of the most decorated ships in U.S. Navy history, and members of Congress can't even provide a statement honoring 34 men who died for their country.
Yeah, I think many people, when they learn this, are outraged and astonished to learn what's been going on over the past 45 years about this. Dave Lewis, we haven't had a chance yet for you to tell us briefly where you were and your experience when Israel attacked the ship.
I was one of the exceedingly fortunate ones. I was about 10 feet from the torpedo when it detonated, and a temporary wall wrapped itself around me and shielded me from the full blast. Virtually everybody within 20 feet of me was killed instantly. And there's no reason why I should still be here. And again, even after that, I was saved that time. The scuttle was closed and watertight integrity was established, and one of our young sailors broke watertight integrity and opened the scuttle and pulled me out. So, twice, the good Lord saved me.
As I recall, I believe this is one of the most highly decorated crews in the U.S. Navy. Is that correct?
That is correct. I don't think there's any question, but it's the most highly decorated ship in the U.S. Navy subsequent to World War II.
Uh-huh.
There was some question whether one of them in World War II might have gotten more than the Liberty or not.
Uh-huh. Now, I know that Jim told us earlier about how Navy top officials then immediately told all of you to speak to no one about this, not even your wives. Did you personally learn about the skipper of the ship, Captain McGonigal, receiving the Medal of Honor? Or did you learn about that later?
Not from the Navy. I was stationed in Washington. Captain McGonigal gave me a call the day before the presentation. And he said he'd like to have at least one member of the crew there if possible, and could I possibly make it? Naturally, I went down to the Navy Yard where the medal was presented.
Did Captain McGonigal say anything about the unusual circumstance that this was given in the Navy Yard instead of at the White House?
No, at the time he didn't. everything was being kept so hush-hush because of classification. I think that's what he thought it was.
Uh-huh. And who actually gave him the medal that day?
The Secretary of the Navy.
Uh-huh. I remember, I think it was Admiral Moore, Thomas Moore, was outraged that that's the way the Medal of Honor was given.
Admiral Moore has been outraged about most everything that's happened with the Liberty. He has been one of our staunchest defenders.
I guess we only have a few more minutes, but it would be nice to hear what has happened from the American Legion. I know the VFW has passed some resolutions and given some sort of support. What has been the case with the American Legion?
Several years ago, I submitted a presentation to the American Legion. It was passed by the state and went to national, and got the report back from the national that it was political.
I see. So, Jim Ennes, I was trying to look back, and it looks to me that a number of times local posts have tried to submit resolutions about the Liberty, and one time it was something was even passed nationally, but as near as I could tell, it looks like the top management has always thrown those out. Is that correct?
That has happened repeatedly all across the country, and local posts have approved resolutions calling for an investigation of the attack, and usually when they get to the national level, they're canceled. They just quietly disappear, and nobody knows what happened to them.
I've got a resolution, Alison, being submitted to the state of New Hampshire legislature, asking the state of New Hampshire legislature to ask Congress to investigate. Let's see what happens.
That's wonderful. I think that's going to happen now all over the country, that posts will submit these resolutions, and we'll all track them this time so that the membership can learn if once again at the top they get thrown out. I think it looks to me that the American Legion membership supports their fellow veterans, and they don't know that at the top these resolutions keep being torpedoed.
Yeah. Well, we'll see. I know our post adjutant is anxious, who is also a state legislator, is anxious to present it, and he says if I'll show up in uniform, he almost guarantees they'll approve it.
Yes, I hope we can. At CNI, we'll keep people informed about what goes on with all of this. And it looks to me like we're down to the final 2 minutes. I wonder, Joe Meadors, as the president of the LVA, if there's just a few thoughts you have to share with people about where we can go, what people can do to support the veterans.
Well, what they can do is just continue writing their members of Congress. If they want a draft letter, just email me at joe@ussliberty.com, and I'll be happy to draft a letter for you and to draft responses that from the responses you receive from your members of Congress. That's one big thing that they can do. Just continue hammering to Congress.
I always encourage people to also CC or send a letter to the local media. That's one way that maybe we can break through the cover-up a little bit too.
Before we go off the air, I'd certainly like to congratulate Larry. This has been a tremendous effort on his part, and he's to be congratulated.
I second that. Thank you so much, Larry, and thanks for joining us. And thanks to all of you for joining us today. I hope we'll be able to do this again. Again, thanks to Jim Ennes and Dave Lewis, Joe Meadors, and Larry Toenjes for being with us at CNI. And this is Alison Weir. And thanks to Andrew, who's been handling all our technical parts and I think doing a great job. So thanks to all of you, and I look forward to resuming the conversation in the future.
Thank you, Alison.
Thank you very much, Alison, and thank you.
Nice to hear your voice.
Thank you, Larry.
Okay.
I think we're off the air now.
Yeah, I was hoping
it's been great having everybody on.